There was a time when 3 3/4 inch action figures were all the rage, and when Micronauts evolved them with the O-ring configuration, which was then adopted by Mego, suddenly the 3 3/4 inch figure became the ideal scale for toy world building. You could now have affordable vehicles and playsets to go with them, but you were no longer limited by 5 points of articulation. These figures could now bend at the waist, they could now sit in real chairs, they could crunch up into vehicles with tight cockpits, they could kneel on the battlefield, they could take a prone position while firing their rifles. And yet, somewhere along the way, they fell out of vogue. It became more popular to be a chunkier monkey in the action figure space with brighter colors than it was to be an intricate, smaller, very posable action man. How that happened? We'll never know. But now we live in a world where it is about articulation, but always in the 6-inch scale, where you mainly want the characters and occasionally a very expensive vehicle, but otherwise you're content to just have icons on a shelf. But one new action figure maker on the scene is preserving a very old bit of wisdom. It's not about size, it's about what you can do with it. These are figures from the new Strike Force Alpha figure range from White Elephant Toys, designed by Matthew LaCroix. Now, you might recall several years ago I had Matthew here on the channel for an interview about the excellent customs he did in the O-ring style for collectors who needed G.I. Joe-style action figures of famous characters that never got a figure. So, for example, he did certain characters in G.I. Joe that never got those variants. He did Rambo for Melinda. He did a Lara Croft for me recently. He even did a Clint Eastwood Man with No Name figure with poncho and everything, and it looks amazing. So I was really excited when he announced he was launching his own figure line, because the guy has so much talent and so much potential. And it's great to see that he's finally doing what he loves. And that has manifested as Strike Force Alpha, which is a classic 3 3/4 inch O-ring configuration, G.I. Joe style action figure of yesteryear. And these figures are based on a completely new mythology. They are not based on G.I. Joe. They have their own story. The story of Strike Force Alpha is a fight against a man who is trying to combine alien DNA with humans and create a race of super soldiers, essentially, to take over the world. And Strike Force Alpha has to stop him at every turn. However, what this did was it opened up possibilities for different kinds of action figures in the range. In this case, one of the ones that I picked up very much reminds me of Goro from Mortal Kombat. He's got multiple arms, but he's like this lizard guy. He's got a brain sticking out of the top of his head. It's a pretty scary villain for any group of heroes to go up against. A very intimidating figure. And I like the way that he's thinking outside the box with the way he's going to make these characters, both the heroes and their adversaries. As for their scale, they are sized identically to classic O-ring G.I. Joes, so they will integrate with them perfectly. You can fit these characters into all of the classic G.I. Joe and other 3 3/4 inch scale vehicles. Each character comes in mint on card forever packaging, which means you have a card back that slips into a plastic shell with a tray inside. So that means you never have to worry about ripping a bubble off permanently and not being able to put them back in their packaging. The figures come with accessories that we would have expected from our 80s G.I. Joes, specifically realistic-looking rifles and backpacks, which is very nice, but they also come with an added amount of evolution. This isn't just the O-ring G.I. Joe reborn under a new brand. This is an evolved O-ring configuration. What I'm referring to is Matthew has developed swappable heads, hands, and feet for these figures to really increase their display versatility and their play possibilities. So for example, while you have wearable helmets, you also have swappable heads that put different helmets on the heads of the characters. The added benefit of this is far more expressive neck and head movement. In addition, he provides the figures with swappable hands, including fists and open palms, things like that. These very solidly pop off at the glove line, and then you just pop the other hands on and you're ready to go. Same goes for the boots. The boots can pop off, and then any number of swappable foot accessories from the Strike Force Alpha accessory packs can be put right on there. These swappable hands and feet mean you get more articulation out of the Strike Force Alpha O-ring configuration than your classic 80s Joe, because you now have wrist swivels and calf swivels by default. If there's any areas of these figures that might need improvement for Wave 2, it's only in 2 places. The figure's paint apps are great. The sculpts are very nice. The figures scale perfectly with 80s O-ring 3 3/4-inch Joes. But there are two areas that I think for Wave 2 they could tweak and really perfect their new model. One is in the backpack pegs. While they fit in the holes in their backs just fine, they tend not to stay. It has something to do with the sizing. I'm not really sure what that's all about. So the backpacks can get loosey-goosey pretty quickly. That's something that you can obviously fix on Wave 1 with some heat shrink, but it'd be nice if they kind of tightened that up for Wave 2. The other problem is the hand swaps. Not because they're not durable. The hand swaps are very durable on these figures. There was no fear that any of this would break. And the thumbs are nice and flexible on all the hands, I should mention. So you're not going to lose any thumbs like we did in the G.I. Joe days. The problem is with the elbow joint. Now again, don't panic. I don't want to mislead you. The elbow joint itself is perfectly durable. There was never any feeling that it was going to fail. The elbow joint's problem is it actually has too much range of motion in the opposite direction of which an elbow is supposed to move. This isn't really an issue when it comes to playing with the toy, but it is when you're trying to put the other hand on after you've popped one set of hands off, because the elbow just starts moving around on you when you try to put pressure on that peg, and it's always slipping away from you. So if they had a way for that elbow to kind of stop where our elbows stop, you know, right here, that way you could hold this with your hand or your fingers while you're putting the hand on the peg with your other, set of fingers. Am I making sense? The point is that with this going like this, I'm simulating because my elbow won't actually do that, but if it's going like this, it's very hard to get it held in place so that you can get the new hand on there. It takes a little bit of fiddling because that elbow is just kind of wanting to fly all over the place. And not in a loosey-goosey way necessarily, but in a range of motion way. Again, I can get the hands swapped, but it's just a little bit more of a headache than it has to be, and that could be solved with just giving it a little bit more rigidity in its range of motion when you're trying to work with that wrist. And then last but not least, the shoulders themselves. They are perfectly durable. There's nothing wrong with them as far as breakage. That's not going to occur. It's just more of a general tolerances thing. They don't feel as tight as G.I. Joes when they were new. G.I. Joes, you could kind of lift those arms up and they'd stay there for a while until, of course, you played with Storm Shadow too much and then he was just all over the place because you never stopped playing with that ninja. But these, they kind of feel like they've got a lot more play in the shoulder rotation right from new. And again, that's not a fatal flaw. It's just this is Wave 1 and they're getting their feet under them and they're going to be making tweaks, I'm sure, with their factory. But as a first effort, as a Wave 1, resurrecting 3 3/4-inch O-ring G.I. Joe style figures, Mego style, Micronaut style, this is an impressive effort. Like these are factory quality action figures. And for anybody who has held on dearly to their 3 3/4-inch collections and didn't want to make the jump to the 6-inch fad and who wanted to keep their USS Flag and their Defiant and their Terrordrome and all those things, but they wished they had more characters to buy that weren't customs that, maybe have cakey paint on them and stuff like that. You wanted factory quality, brand new 3 3/4-inch figures that were O-ring, that weren't just 25th anniversary style, but were O-ring. Strikeforce Alpha is doing it right. I mean, they really are trying to push the configuration forward a little bit, give you that added versatility with the accessory packs, with the new sculpts, with the new characters, with the new storyline. So you're getting different kinds of figures to start putting into your displays. But they're also doing it with the wrist swivels and the calf swivels and the interchangeable parts. There's a lot of good thought that went into these, and what you get is a quality action figure with really good paint and sculpting. And then they're compatible with everything you already own from your other 3 3/4-inch collections. Whether you want this guy to drive the Vamp or you want him to fly a snow speeder, 3 3/4-inch can do it all. And Strikeforce Alpha looks poised to be able to continue that legacy. And that is really exciting.